Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Just Do Shit Philosophy series on the True Words Aren't Beautiful channel. We are continuing from the last video in the sequence on this playlist. I highly recommend that you watch everything from the first video, even if the first 4 videos have low audio quality before I got this mic. And we are now going to transition into the topic of being kind to yourself, which is a point we touched upon in the last video, because it's a very crucial point in order to be able to just do shit effectively and efficiently. Because when you're not kind to yourself, your inner critic blinds you to your progress and to making fair and objective assessments of your own progress, or accurate critiques of where you need to improve, or where you haven't improved, or where you actually are a lot better than you think you are. When I look back at these videos I've been doing since last Saturday, roughly when I started, because this series started when I had some very suicidal thoughts in the past week. I've been going through some major emotional roller coasters, and please don't mind the dog, she's just sitting next to me and someone's at the door. So, going through those, it's good to see progress even one day apart with one video to the next, seeing how desolate I looked last week versus today's video. It's very good, just like you can see progress anywhere, such as you go to the gym for a few months and you do the right program, you see muscle changes, you see yourself slimmer and more comfortable in your own body. You practice cooking and eventually other people enjoy what you make for them. You draw and draw and draw, and you still might be embarrassed by the first sketch you've made in your journal, but you're proud of what you have on the last page, and then you start a second or third volume, and then eventually the things that you felt ashamed of from day one of your journey to start exploring and doing new things, you appreciate their low quality, you appreciate that they were your first step, as opposed to saying, that wasn't good. No, what's good about it is it's the first step towards achieving anything. Now, on the one hand, when I'm being self-critical, I can look at myself like Ricardo Lopez, who was well known as the Bjork stalker, even though I don't really think that's an accurate description, or like the Bjork-obsessed fan who killed himself. Except when you factor in that he tried to mail an acid-spraying book to her. That's probably the most stalkerish thing, though I don't really know how he got her address or how he would find her when he was stuck in Hollywood, Florida. But anyway, you can watch the whole video on YouTube, about an hour, compressing 20 hours of footage from when he recorded himself on a camcorder. And you can see the rapid breakdown over the course of a year, how much weight he gains, how his mental state just gets worse. And that's a guy that I feel a lot of compassion for, because this is someone who really, really, really needed better mental health care, better love and support. And while his family loved and supported him, he really just didn't give himself enough kindness that he should have had, which is what drove him off the deep edge to mail something to Bjork with the intent of killing her, and then shoot himself and record it. That's not in the YouTube video, but you can still see it. And it looks like my dog wants to say hello, so let's say hello to the audience, Bowie. If you can't be kind to yourself, at least be kind to your pets, because your pets are very kind to you. Sorry. Just give us a moment to be affectionate with each other. Anyway, so going on here. That is an example of how I could look at myself saying, yeah, I look really bad. This series could end up being what people will play if I end up going through with my suicidal thoughts and making them into suicidal actions. Or this could be a great starting point where I'm at rock bottom and I can be climbing. You'll have to excuse me, it's a bit hard to talk when I've got a wet dog tongue on my throat. So, The other thing I have to say is I got a comment from a friend who enjoyed the last video in the series because he resonated with what I said and told me that he was harsh on himself because there was a time that he didn't need any discipline, where he was very good about everything he did. He was basically on autopilot, but then his emotional and mental state snapped due to a bunch of events in his life happening, which I won't go into details, and he ends up crashing and burning. And at one point, he just really lost a lot of his discipline, where he was playing video games like Rocket League all day, or drinking bottles of wine and not working, and just living at home. And in his most recent bout, there was a time that he didn't even shower for 3 weeks. Granted, that doesn't mean he has no discipline. His discipline just transferred elsewhere because he raises chickens, and he was limited to caring for his chickens in their coop, but not for himself, hence not showering for 3 weeks at a time. And this reminds me of the concept of my own trap, my own frame trap of overcompensating throughout the years. Now, before I go on, let me explain the frame trap. So, frames are just like boxes, or lenses for reality. Whether you look at something from a spiritual frame, metaphysical frame rather, or you look at something from an economic frame, or a artistic frame. There are many ways to perceive reality and to analyze and validate things. The thing is, those are just facets and pockets of reality. You don't see the whole picture. So, for example, if someone were to look at my metaphysical growth and development, they might praise it. If someone were to look at my financial development, they might say, needs work. But objectively, you have to be kind and know that there are some areas, just like in an RPG character sheet, you'll have some strong stats, such as you've got high intelligence and high dexterity, but low strength. And that shouldn't be something that you should beat yourself up for, because you're not a jack of all trades, or jackass of all trades. You are a unique character, and you work with your stats, and you improve those that you feel you need to if your character doesn't really match his skills, or her skills. So, when you're caught in frames, just remember that you don't need to stick with those frames. You do not need to make those frames your reality and your identity. When I was caught in the martial arts frame, I looked at everything as conflict, being a student, and then eventually being a teacher or a master, and that made me miserable because everything was really just trying to find a way to reference the art of war, the Book of the Five Rings, or martial culture, especially Chinese culture, and then some Japanese here and there. Not everyone relates to it, and it's very, very steeped in culture and history. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's applicable to every situation. You can find parallels just like people would read The Art of War or the Book of Five Rings for business purposes, especially in the 80s and the 90s. But it's not strictly business. It's not strictly for anything other than their designated purpose, which was The Art of Warfare by Sun Tzu or the Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi. There are common principles for life, but you can't really hold those in as high regard at times, particularly when, if you don't understand it, you're not going to be able to apply it, because there's a difference between knowing, doing, and applying, and what more is teaching. So, if you don't know those life principles, you can't understand what's taught in those books. You can't apply them to business. You can't necessarily apply them to politics. And definitely don't try to teach them. So, going on from frame traps, one of the worst frame traps is your mindset. If you get caught in someone else's frame, that becomes your reality tunnel. You get stuck there and you can't see anything beyond that frame. Whether it's the frame that gets you stuck into believing that you're a piece of shit when you're in a bad relationship, or when you have a dysfunctional family, or you think that you suck because you didn't get into a good college, or you don't earn enough, you don't own the entire IKEA catalog. None of this is true. These are all just frameworks and values. They don't have to be yours. You might accept them or you might connect with them, but they are not the be-all, end-all for everything. So in my recent frame trap of overcompensating throughout the years, I have to admit, the shit I was doing for others was not for me. If it wasn't to impress, it was to pretend that I was being some sort of Holden Caulfield-like character, playing catcher in the rye to stop people from making the mistakes I've made. And I realized this is not part of the just do shit philosophy because it wasn't discipline. It was another form of overcompensating. So, just some brief spoilers for those of you who have not finished the entirety of the Better Call Saul series. This is more like Kim Wexler punishing herself for her crime, as opposed to Jimmy McGill trying to front and seem better than he really was, pretending to be Saul Goodman, showing off and acting like he was really cool, versus Kim, who just had so much guilt and shame that she trapped herself in menial work, depriving the world of her brilliance as the best lawyer in the entire series. So, to an extent, I saw this in some of my therapy, where I roughed it out with some therapist that I didn't like because of someone's recommendation, only to find out this therapist's style matched my friend's personality and needs, not mine. That particular example was this therapist, a couple years younger than me, years ago. And she would use concepts such as, oh, if you're uncomfortable, that's a good thing, that's therapy. Oh, that's just healing crisis, you're meant to be uncomfortable. But when I talked to my old therapist in the US, he said, these people have very questionable credentials. If you're feeling like crap, that doesn't necessarily mean you're being challenged. It means that these people do not know how to relate to you, and they do not know how to work with you. They're trying to force their ideas and their frameworks on you. So, naturally, I dumped those therapists and walked away from that office because I felt I was not getting my money's worth, and that they were trying to project a lot of ideas onto me, not to mention that they didn't realize that I'm Asian American. They just thought that I was some Filipino who lived overseas as the child of an overseas Filipino worker and then came back here and was ashamed, and I say, no, that's not the case. I actually am American. And they had a hard time believing that, saying, oh, why are you here then? Wouldn't you be better off back in the US? That's their framework. They're trapped in the framework that I would not live here if I were American. They think I would live in the US because that's where Asian Americans prefer to be. I mean, I felt trapped here, but I do prefer to live here over the US right now. So that's the frame trap that they have of their mindset and their assumptions and projections of what an Asian American's values are. Also, when I did hypnotherapy, the person who was doing it hyped it up about how great it would be to go through subconscious and unconscious programming. But ultimately, it was limited in how it could help me, because it was more me trying to say, is this working? Is this working? And after a couple of months of this, I just said, I don't think it's working as good as it is, because it's mostly you talking and me hoping that this works. Then when I tried to do neuromuscular therapy and art therapy, they're great for helping me to express myself, great for getting me to move and not be tired or stiff. But like anything, there always needs to be follow-through. And I was too hard on myself because of those 4 different types of therapy I was doing simultaneously, showing how insistent I was on fixing myself and making myself not a piece of shit or a failure in life. I was hard on myself, saying, I'm doing all this therapy, why am I not improving? Well, it's, again, having the right process. And having all sorts of therapy is not the right process, and just one kind of therapy alone may not even be the appropriate process for you. It's a matter of figuring out the leaks and then plugging them. Just because you go to a therapist doesn't mean that your problems will be solved. Just because you learn to express yourself through art doesn't mean that everything will be better. Just because you go to the gym and you actually go there every day or every week for your annual membership instead of paying for it in January and then stopping at mid-February, None of these will necessarily lead to change. Even if you say you're doing shit, you have to do it. You have to do shit with purpose. Likewise, if you don't have the right process, just doing and doing again and again does not necessarily lead to improvement. The same way that learning something wrong and being convinced that it's right for years doesn't compare to learning and doing something properly on day one and following that correct process for a few months. I met people who did something wrong for years. When I learned correctly and practiced it for a couple of months, people thought that I was the expert, I was the experienced person, and I saw this with swimming. I ran into people at the pool who were very self-certain about how to swim, but they couldn't even do a forward crawl. Interestingly, my coach was a former Olympic trainer, so they tried to show off, and there was this element of racism there since they were French and Germans, who were looking down on us for being Asians, but they ended up embarrassing themselves when they saw how much stamina we had and how gracefully we moved, almost like if we were in the air, it's like we were gliding and flying through the air. Just missing our capes, of course. So, similarly, when I would get frustrated with students or people that I would mentor, I felt like a failure when they would go back to their old habits or act ungrateful towards me. Because it's my personal belief, and it still is, that guidance, love, support, skills, and purpose, when you have all that, it inspires people to choose to be better. It's what makes me believe that if you gave anyone like Jeffrey Dahmer all of that, he would be less inclined to do what Jeffrey Dahmer did. I failed to note that not everyone is necessarily ready or dedicated to transform. Some people just want to do the same shit again and again because it's convenient and they're afraid of change. And this was the same with me when I wondered how I could be doing 4 different kinds of therapy simultaneously, but it wasn't dropping my overall issues of anger, identity, feeling trapped, and ostracism from people. This is the kind of frame trap you get stuck in and wonder why you aren't improving in your areas of life and skills that you target. This is what leads to anger and frustration, self-loathing, and eventually resignation to stop you from doing anything. When I was doing these 4 therapies, I felt trapped in all 4 frameworks because I was failing to meet the expectations that each framework had created for me. The expectation was I would get better, and I would be better. It was a kind of control mechanism without these therapists knowing it. It also translated to me freaking out a lot of people whom I tried to help out when I tried to apply everything I knew and say, okay, so I see what's wrong, I figured out the leaks, let's fix them. And even when I was accurate about what those leaks were, those became part of those individuals' identity, such as someone saying, well, this is just me, this is what I do. I say, okay, well, if that's what you do and that's who you are, I really wonder why you're still unhappy and miserable. It's a good thing that I sent that by text message, because if he were in front of me, he would have tried to punch my face, but then he would also been very sorry because it would have led to a big fight, since I do punch back. Now, this reminds me as well of a college ex-girlfriend I had. She had a pet hamster that constantly kept escaping, no matter how many times they'd catch her, and it even figured out how to open its cage. When they couldn't find it for a couple of days, they thought it died, but when they found it just outside the cage, it was crying and waiting to be caught and returned to the cage because it starved. Needless to say, the hamster learned the hard way why escaping wasn't such a good idea. It had to learn from its own bitter experience and suffering in order to be inspired to make those changes. Just like I mentioned in the last video, our negative experiences are the ones that lead us in the right direction if we pay attention to the signs. No one can necessarily tell us what we need to do, but if we listen, it's to our benefit. We're just more eager to listen when there's something we're trying to recover from or heal from or improve. So, another example of trying to be a good teacher and students making false conclusions. Favorite strip of mine from Calvin and Hobbes is when Calvin asks his mom, "Hey mom, can I try smoking?" And his mom says, "Oh, sure. Your grandfather left some cigarettes around here. Why don't you try one?" Surprised, Calvin tries a cigarette. He lights up, then he starts coughing and gagging, and his face turns all shades of gray. Calvin's mom then asks, "So, have you learned our lesson?" Calvin says, "Yes. Trusting parents can be hazardous to our health." Yes. Instead of realizing cigarettes are bad, Calvin just says, "Nope, I have bad parents." So what I'm trying to teach isn't necessarily what these people learn and conclude. And this is why sometimes you just can't teach. You just have to do, or you have to let others do things. So in your own life, you have to use your journals or video diaries, like the Me Right Now framework, to observe where you're stuck. Instead of thinking you're an idiot for not realizing something sooner, you should look at yourself the way you look at your puppy learning to shit outside the house and not on the rug. How can you get angry at such an adorable little thing wagging its tail? Shout at it or hit it. Unless you're a complete monster, you won't do any of that. You'll understand it just doesn't know and it needs to be treated with gentleness, patience, and encouragement. So, look at yourself like a little puppy that keeps shitting on the rug because it hasn't been taught properly. And if you shout at it, all that does is make it afraid of you. Doing this yourself can be a bit hard, of course, if you have guilt and shame, which I do for things like past relationships, arguments with friends, and nasty things I've said, like I hope you die. And looking at how, again, I felt stuck then, and just like I feel at times, there is no way out, even at this very moment in my life. But it's when we return to our proper minds, we say, why do we keep doing that? Why do we keep saying these things? Why do we keep doing these things when we know better intellectually, but we still don't feel it? So, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you what I have been doing and recognizing my own mistakes. And this is why you need to be kind to yourself. You will make mistakes. You will find yourself struggling, and it never ends the older you get. It just continues because the bar for being better just keeps on raising as you get better. So if you're going for the score of 100 one year, once you get to 100, you feel like you're at the bottom of the ladder because now you're shooting for the score of 1,000. So keep climbing, keep improving. Don't be so nasty to yourself because your 100 is still better than your 1 or your 0. And when you get to your 1,000, you'll be crying that it's not your 10,000. So you can inspire, guide, and teach others to just do shit, but you're not responsible for anyone but yourself. So, and when you are helping others, such as you might be tutoring someone in English or math, or you might have an art student, be equally kind to them just as you are to yourself, which is the hardest thing to do when you think you're a piece of shit who doesn't know shit, and worse when you look at others and think that they are at risk of making the same mistake as you. Sometimes you just have to learn from your own mistakes instead of others. Anyway, that's all I've got for now. I will see you next time. Thank you for watching.